kill you.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Zaku Talk. I am your host, Patrick Skeyhill. This season we are doing G versus Wing, and that means my co-host is, of course, the taxidermied...
Bob Skerry.
Yeah, very good. Episode 29 of both these shows this week, but before we dive into that, Bob, how's your week been going?
My week was pretty okay. I finally got the results of the ADHD evaluation that I was going in for to try and see what was up with me. And as it turns out, no, I do not have ADHD, but yes, I have complex PTSD, which is why a lot of the symptoms I have might bear some similarities. So I just picked up a few books that I'm going to start using to try and help me get my head into that space and start working on that from there. Hopefully that will help me to stop doing things like overanalyze and become a perfectionist in moments that puts me into a place of mental freeze. That was my big thing this week. Also, I got an invitation to do a VO job, so I'm waiting to hear back and see if I made the cut.
But you can't go into details on that yet.
Well, I mean, there aren't many details to state about it. All I can say, because I haven't written an NDA, so there's nothing to not say. It's just for like a series of miniature classes on financial education, learning how to better handle your spreadsheets and what have you.
Well, that's very cool. Let's see what's been happening over here. It's a bit slower now that production has been sort of shut down in Southern California for the next few months. But that's okay. There's plenty of stuff to work on. I'm rapidly approaching the end of this first draft of this feature screenplay. That will be nice. And then animation all the time, working with animators, doing some animation stuff myself, talking with studios about this when we can go back to shoot against these LED volumes, getting all of that prepared. I also had, Bob, very interestingly this week, as part of my, you may remember, my Hollywood Foreign Press credentials, I got to attend the LA Israeli Film Festival, all virtual, of course. Ooh. We're very safe. Very small program, just 2 features and 4 short films. There are 5 short films. One of them was a documentary, so I don't really count that. But these 4 short films, Bob, what a fantastic selection. What a strong program. When you only have so much space to do, you clearly only go for the best. And these are some great films that came over from Israel. And then I was reminded of this feature film I saw a couple years back from there called Foxtrot. That was this very interesting film that not a lot of people were talking about after it came out. But I've been able to watch it a few times since it came out. It's a very great film. I sort of recommend that for everybody there. So that has been what's going on with me.
Wonderful.
Yes, so great. So we had some pretty low-key weeks, but that's all right because we had some high-key action this week in these 2 animes. So, Bob, why don't you give us a summary of episode 29 of G Gundam?
You've got it. Episode 29, Running Away, Saisaishi in Love, or, in Japanese, Shihai Hoki, Koi ni Doki Doki Saisaishi. Doki Doki is it's a sort of onomatopoeia to sound like the thump thump that we think of when we think of like rubber hose animation hearts, the ones that burst out of your chest but don't actually leave the skin, just to make it a little more graphic and horrible. But Saisaishi's next opponent is the Mermaid Gundam. However, he is distracted as he falls in love with the pilot's sister, Cecile. They go on dates, which prevents Sai from training. Almost arriving late for the match, Domon helps Sai make it to the match on time. Saisaishi manages to defeat the Mermaid Gundam by ripping off his own arm and using it as a decoy. Cecile and her brother have to leave, and Cecile kisses Sai, wishing him luck in the finals.
Over here, in episode 29 of Gundam Wing, the heroine of the battlefield, or in my mangled Japanese, Senjo no heroine. Yeah, is this heroine? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, literally, it's the loan word. They just spelt it out here phonetically.
Yeah, okay.
So, hero, sort of like how they try to do hero in the name of the main character. So, the femme of hero is heroine, and Senjo would just be the battlefield. So, literally, battlefield heroine, or heroine of the battlefield. So, it can be read both ways.
There you go. Well, in this episode, Sally Poe, sadly captured by Oz, but she is able to hide Hero's wing Gundam. That is until Noin shows up and arrives and rescues her, and then they're able to recover it. Relena, now the leader of the Sand Kingdom, clashes ideas with new student Dorothy Catalonia, granddaughter of Duke Dermail, who desires the thrill of war. Hero and Catra, who have now arrived back on Earth, try to escape from an Oz carrier. So that's what we've got going on over here. A lot of action-packed stuff going on now that the recaps are over. So your episode of your episode of G Gundam, Bob, I actually liked. It was helpful because I actually had a comparison. It was a very similar episode to the late 90s anime Outlaw Star. Do you remember that show, Bob?
I know it existed. I never ended up watching it.
It's the show that actually got me back into anime after sort of a hiatus, because I got that. It was like the first thing I purchased on DVD. It was like the first DVD I owned was this Outlaw Star box set that was at like a Suncoast video. And as I was leaving, the woman was like, do you want to sign up for this anime mailing list or whatever? And I said no. And she goes, well, if you're anime, I don't know, I think I was in 9th grade at this point. She was like, well, if you're into anime now, you're probably going to be in it for the rest of your life. And sure enough, I'm still here. So maybe I should have signed up for this list thing.
Yeah, for all those Suncoasts that we still see at the malls that we go to.
I guess that's true. It wouldn't have mattered in the long run anyway. But yeah. So like there's an episode 2 where the main character's guy, like sidekick guy, who's like the boy genius of the group, like he and him and the main guy get into a fight because the main guy's like lackadaisical and is just like, improv. Like he's kind of like you. He's more into the bullshitting. He doesn't like sort of having the plan. He's just like, I can figure it out as I go. And he's like, no, because we're gonna deal with this assassin. But then he goes and he falls and he unknowingly meets the assassin. They both don't know that they're on the sort of opposing sides because she's like an 8-year-old girl that pilots things with cats. You see that, yeah, they kind of go on like their date and you spend their time, they fall in love. So like I was like, oh, good, I have a nice comp to this, and now I can try to understand a little better why certain things aren't, why I like it in one thing but may not like it in another thing. And I thought maybe I would like kind of hint more at like what the difference between the two genres are, but there actually wasn't that much of it here. There was sort of your obligatory Domon kind of steps in so that we can at least see him fighting in the titular mobile suit, which was actually a fun moment because there is a callback that their Delta, their Gulfstream Jetstream attack is a callback to the original Gundam, where the Black Tri-Stars would, of course, use that. But mostly what it was like we didn't spend enough time with Saisaishi, or the time we spent with Saisaishi didn't clue us in a lot. And I think the advantage was that Outlaw Star had was that it was really only trying to sell us the threat was very simple. It's just like they win or they die, these main characters. So you didn't have to spend a lot of time getting that point home to us. But we got to see Saisaishi kind of argue with the main character, and then we got, not Saisaishi, this sort of Saisaishi proxy character in Outlaw Star fight with the main character. Then we spend time with him, and he goes on his little adventure with this girl, and then he eventually comes back and the episode gets to end. But with Saisaishi, it feels like we're a little bit with him, a little bit with the monks, a little bit with Domon, a little bit with the bad guys by themselves. Not the bad guys per se, but where were they from? Denmark? Yeah, the Denmark people. And then like a bunch of stuff at the end. Then there's sort of like this kind of battle where they're underwater and he severs his arm. And I don't know, it just feels like we were sort of pulled in a lot of directions. And had we been a little more focused, I might have been able to get behind the Saisaishi character more. But I don't know how much I've learned about him, despite the time we did spend with him in the episode, that I didn't already know. Is there something I'm sort of missing in what we got out of him this episode, Bob?
Yeah, no, you have a pretty good handle on what was happening. I won't disagree that it is trying to do too many things at once here, but I do think that for what little we're supposed to keep an eye on for Saisashi, he's a very one-note character of, I am way too young to be taking this as seriously as everybody else.
Okay.
You know, he's I don't know what the active age is for him off the top of my head right here, but I do know that he is at least in the, you know, prepubescent, starting to change situation, 12 to 15, somewhere in there. Like they say throughout the show, it's very understated, but the two gentlemen that accompany him, they keep treating him like he's still much younger than he is and not giving him the chance to grow because they're expecting him to act the part of the child. And in having this tryst, he's able to take on a few more adult aspects of himself and is acknowledged by all these old men who are speaking simultaneously on the ship.
Yeah, I'm glad that that trope is kept alive of like all monks have to speak simultaneously.
Well, it's definitely supposed to be the idea that these Shaolin monks are so attuned to their training that they are effectively hive-minding.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I do think that the pilot of the Mermaid Gundam is very much an afterthought. I'm sure it's more that they wanted to have the idea of mermaid versus dragon, these two mythological creatures going at it. And they just were like, well, okay, yeah, we have this cool blue-haired guy who really has no reason to hold back in his coming battle, which to me bothered a single point, being the Mermaid Gundam is apparently on its last legs and it has one more fight to try and survive.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like it would be able to press on in the tournament. However, we got at the very beginning of this that you can rebuild your Gundam as many times as you like. So I don't know if it's that Denmark didn't have enough funds to support this individual or whatever the case may be. But the fact that one knockout on his part means that he is out of the running altogether is very different than what we've seen with everything else so far. Like, we understand why Zeus Gundam is out. It was literally evaporated. And we understand why one of these two assassin types had to leave, the one from last episode, because he ended up trying to change his ways before being defeated in the battle. The only one that I don't know whether they stayed or left is the Cobra Gundam. I feel like although it was defeated, it could still be in the tournament, just on a lower rank.
Yeah, I sort of noted that too. It seemed odd that Denmark couldn't ever repair its Gundam. And I'm just like, I feel bad. Their budget for this Gundam thing must be really terrible. But you bring up a good point with the Zeus Gundam too, where like Japan had the forethought of just like, hey, let's have a second Gundam just in case. And that seems to have helped out. And so I wonder, like, Greece didn't want like a backup Gundam. They weren't like, you never know. We got to make sure we get through the end of this. We have this 10-foot tall fighter. Let's take the best use of him that we can. So,
well, he was the favorite to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And because he was so overpowered, seemingly compared to the rest, they were probably like, well, we don't need to invest in much more. We put all the funds that we would have into a single Zeus Gundam and having a copy of it into his chariot.
Yeah, that's
like,
right.
I think the chariot is the downfall of the Zeus Gundam.
There's just no need for that. Yeah, do any other nations have like backup Gundams, or is it just Japan mostly so that they could sort of do the customary mid-season upgrade?
You know, it's interesting you say that. I don't know that anybody has an effective double or a second entry that has been listed into the thing. Because as Carrot said way back when we were still in Guiana Highlands, they were trying to hold off on using that Gundam until the final fight, so they had a distinct advantage, not just in terms of technology, but also readability.
Yep.
Everybody would have been able to know what the Shining Gundam did up to that point, and if they could get through to the final match, then they could jump out with the God Gundam and be like, well, you don't know my technical capabilities, so you have to play a little more guesswork on me. They were hoping to psych out whoever was going to be in the final match.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway with that, but I don't think anybody else that we've seen so far has been involved with having a secondary Gundam, whether that's an upgrade or just a second body. I think it's, as long as you have the funds to continue rebuilding your mech, you're allowed to keep re-entering.
Okay. And the other thing, the note of this Mermaid Gundam, which, turns into a fish, not relevant, but it can do that, is that, he didn't even seem that badly damaged by the end of the fight. It looked like Saisashi cracks his faceplate thing, which, interestingly enough, hurts the guy, even though it's not the Gundam's actual face. And then at the airport, the girl is like, well, the Mermaid Gundam's no more. And I go, well, it looked like it was still mostly there, just didn't have this underwater thing. So just maybe don't use that part of it and just keep fighting? I don't know.
He had the tactical advantage of being able to fight underwater, and that was probably part of the conditions for being able to win further on down the line. His out-of-water capabilities are probably what ran the mech down so quickly in the course of these semifinal matches.
Yeah, thank goodness they only had the one round on the mountain, or he would have been screwed for most of this tournament.
Well, I don't know if you've seen or cared to notice, but we do keep having a rotation on wherever these matches are taking place from what we've seen. We have a destroyed cityscape, we have a mountainous area, we have the white tile. I think there may have been another one since, but we have at least those 3 different variations. And the fact that we're seemingly allowed to just poke a hole in the center of this freaking white tile to go into the sea below and have cameras pre-set up in this inevitability.
Yeah, is there only like one match a day, or like now somebody else has used the white tile and they're like, well, great, now I got to deal with this big giant hole in the center. That was not part of the plan.
I got to dodge around this hole. We got to put this steel grate over it. Like we have so many potholes in Massachusetts that we have to put these steel grates over.
There is a scene that bothers me a bit here. I've accepted it, but I wanted to know what your take was as a long-time devotee of the genre. Just give me your take on the talking caterpillar. Is this a thing that even registered with you, or I don't know, did it just wash over because you're so used to these kinds of weird things?
I mean, it's sort of a throwaway joke. It's no different than the "it's a living" that we had in Flintstones and whatever. It's one of those things.
Yeah,
where
but Flintstones did that all the time.
We're just trying to get a joke out of it.
We're 29 episodes
because
in.
This is a routine that people who are trying to swindle their way out of free food or whatever, like a dead roach or something from their bag, they'll throw it into the soup, say, what the hell is this? I want my money back, or I want free food and my money back, whatever they can try and get out of it. And it's a scam. The fact that Cecile was able to point out the scam is what we needed to get to, but just having the, no, I didn't do it. I wasn't even in here. Hearing the pleading of the bug is for us, the viewer, and less for the people who are actually around.
Okay, so just to be clear, giant snake, weird and out of place. Talking bug, totally normal.
Talking bug, again, I wouldn't call it a normal occurrence in the world. It's really just a sight gag.
It's not a sight gag, the bug talks, so it's actually a full-on gag.
No, okay, rather, when I say sight gag, I mean the fact that the bug talked. It is a gag. It is not meant to be anything more than here's a quick snippet, and that's it. We don't ever have talking bugs again. The horse Funsaiki will not talk to us later on in the show.
Yeah, thank goodness that the horse.
Yeah,
will
we do
talk.
not have a Mr. Ed situation.
It will
with
only pilot a mobile suit. Great. Okay.
So yeah, that's my take on it.
So the one thing in comparing this to the Outlaw Star episode that I think diminished it a lot of the potential here was that in Outlaw Star, they had to fight against the girl that Jim, the sidekick, falls in love with. Here, Saisashi's just fighting his brother. I think there could have been a more dramatic license you would have had if you also fought this girl who was also his age that had this sort of same burden kind of put upon her. They could have bonded over that. It could have been a much tougher battle for Saisashi to kind of have to find within himself, rather than just like, oh, if I defeat him, then they both have to go home, which they didn't really have to, but they chose to because their Gundam was permanently destroyed, even though it looked mostly fine. So that could have been, like, if I were redoing this episode, that'd be something I'd look at putting her as the pilot and seeing what kind of mileage you could get out of that.
Yeah, I think that we're trying to dodge that, though, because not only do we have a blue-haired female pilot coming up in literally the next episode.
Well, just don't make her blue hair. There you go. It's problem solved.
Well, hold on. Besides that, right, we also are trying not to dive too deeply into the Romeo, Juliet, and Tybalt situation that could be here, you know? And it's not even like the pilot of the Mermaid Gundam is terribly miffed that the two of them were dating. It's just why would you do that? You're going to compromise his fight because he wants to fight him at his highest. And Saisaishi, we could have just made him be the jerk that we've come to know him as, but the fact that he answered the way he did with not wanting her to go is supposed to show us that he has grown up some. Typically, he would have gone with the cowardice route, as we've seen in some of the prior episodes with regard to the ghosts and the mummies and all this other supernatural stuff. He's absolutely terrified because he's a kid. But to see him be willing to acknowledge that I'm making this choice for a personal reason of care, love, affection, and all these other things that one might call masculine growth, we get to see that come through in a way that would not have seemed as genuine if she had been the pilot.
Well, I guess that growth I don't find very interesting, or it feels too cartoonish. I don't even know what it like. This desire to fight to his best. We're already seeing that with Domon anyway, and I bet it's going to come up with a lot of these fighters. So I'm a little numb to it at this point.
Well, okay. So that's fair that you might be numb to it because it is something that is throughout this entire series, the seeming soul drive. But we are also trying to push the idea of Warriors Code stuff, right? Something that may not interest you, and that's fine. But typically speaking, is trying to indicate and communicate that regular words might not be able to elicit. So I feel like it's important to acknowledge that fighting at one's best is like being well rested before a debate night, you know?
Well, one, I don't know if the show can take advantage of things that words can't elicit because it uses them way too much. And that was sort of the difference in this Outlaw Star episode, is all these kind of quiet moments as we just get to kind of watch and observe. And so the show doesn't have to tell us these things. It doesn't need monks to remind us what's at stake. But I think, especially since we don't really know much about Saisashi other than this one note, I'd rather not see him grow so much because you're not giving him the time to kind of believably do that anyway. I'd rather just see other sides of him that we didn't know, especially if he's going to be the character we're not spending the most time with anyway.
Once again, using my quote unquote Sentai color theory, your 5-man group setup, right? Mm-hmm. You have all these different archetypes. And so far, we've seen that the archetype for Saisaishi is the comedian. Doesn't know how best to talk about those emotions that he's feeling, especially in this state of transition from childhood to adulthood. So being able to take all his stuff as simplified, I think, is the best way to resolve it for yourself as you watch. I'm not saying that it's not lazy writing, but we also can't have everybody be on the same emotional and intellectual keel. You know, sometimes you have to give somebody else the scraps because you're giving all the meat to somebody else.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call it lazy writing. I think it's just like it fails to live up to its potential, and because he's only getting the scraps, that's why I think you don't do the arc with him. You do more, like I said, like you peel back layers of the onion. Like what's really going on in Saisaishi that he's covering up with his youthfulness and with this kind of jokester bravado that he's putting on the world. And that when he has to be more honest as he meets this love interest, now he gets to show a different side or find a different side of him that maybe he weren't even aware of. It doesn't have to be an arc. It's just like what else is going on in there. That would be fun.
I think that this is a very muted arc. All right.
Yeah, I agree. Muted. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not that the arc is not there, but I do think that this is the culmination of everything that we're going to have about Saisaishi for basically the rest of the series. Other than a few trite implications here and there when they do some group stuff towards the end of the series. Saisaishi has had a bunch of things happen in a somewhat bland way in a matter of moments. He had to do something selfless, admittedly, in order to try and impress the girl that he has now shown interest in, that he may not have seen before because he was just being a little shit. And then having to deal with the fact that he is going to have to sacrifice something that he cares about in order to fulfill the duties that have been bestowed on him. So over the course of 22 minutes, he's been able to go from being a child to the start of adulthood.
But he didn't really have to sacrifice it, because in theory they could have stayed like all the other defeated people could. But or they could email or whatever. Like, there are ways you can keep up the communication.
Okay, you're making a lot of assumptions for 1994. 1994 at best.
Yeah.
You can call.
Yeah.
But at that point, I don't even think we had area codes going on for real yet. So imagine calling collect to Neo Denmark.
Yeah, but they're in a world where robots, they can predict that someday maybe robots or spaceships of this level will exist. Why? If you can have space colonies that don't have tops to them, you could have an email service.
We're also talking about a Super Robo series as opposed to having the reasoning that we could use with something like Gundam Wing.
Well, that's the thing. So you're Super Robo, so literally you can do anything. They could do like mind communication power. Maybe she's a martial artist too, and they can communicate through the mind. You know, it's fine.
There are a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas, but I think we're diving too deep into something that is supposed to be surface level. This is comic book. This is not a novel.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean?
That's what I'm saying. So it's fine. That's what the show has done. And I, watching, thinking like, how could you maximize your potential here? And so there are ways you could do it.
Sure. I mean, I was just going to want to leave a little final pin on this and note that this is 1994. This is the same time when people still thought that Romeo and Juliet was a romance as opposed to just the worst fucking tragedy, in that it is a tragedy and it is badly done. And so there were, in any serial that you would watch around this time, American or otherwise, there's always at least one episode where you have this style of, oh, I fall in love, star-crossed love with an individual that I wouldn't have known prior, but oh no, they're related or connected to the entity that I must defeat. What will I do? I will sacrifice that so that I can follow through with what I am beholden to. And look at how much I've grown. It's a throwaway trope. And it's something that I didn't have any real stake in going into this episode.
It's not about sort of their love. It's about learning who Saisaishi is and seeing other sides of him. That's how you could utilize it. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because he's not the main character. It just shows us more than whatever we're supposed to get out of him battling.
Anyway, let's talk about Gundam Wing and those giant forked eyebrows.
Yes, they're very famous, these eyebrows. I kid you not. A little background here, in case you're wondering. As I mentioned, Dorothy Catalonia, granddaughter Duke Dermail Catalonia. Her father was the original head of Oz, and he died 1 year before the show begins, and Treize gets to take control of it from there. So Dorothy and Treize are cousins. More interestingly, they're actually step cousins, because Treize's mother, Angelina, was in love with a Romefeller member that was Treize's father, but was forced to marry Dorothy's uncle because of, political reasons. And they give birth to Treize's half-brother, Vinct, who was killed. He and Dorothy's father killed in an attack by Hiro Yui and assassin Odin Lowe, who raised Hiro Yui. Unbeknownst to sort of Treize or anyone like that, is who killed them. Treize's mother sadly goes crazy after that, and her husband, Dorothy's uncle, has to then imprison her, lock her away. So, that sort of explains a little bit of things about Treize we might talk about later on. This, not really being part of Romefeller, but kind of. And the only reason why he got control of Oz was because during this attack that Hiro has that kills his half-brother and the leader of Oz, Treize actually sort of stands out in battle. He actually saves Noin's life and is able to kind of scare away Hiro, though he doesn't know it's Hiro, and this assassin Odin at the time, and like distinguishes himself in battle, and that's how he was able to get his position in Oz.
So when you keep talking about this hero, is it the Hiro Yui we know, or is it the Hiro Yui that is eventually assassinated?
No, yeah, so it's the Hiro Yui we know. It's like 1 year before the show takes place, all this stuff happens. The original Hiro Yui, his nephew is Treize's father.
That is interesting.
Yeah, a lot of fun facts there that the show never has time to kind of really dig into. Okay. So that's where Dorothy Catalonia comes from. So she grew up spending time with Treize, but is purportedly been sent here by her father. But as I sort of alluded to last episode, she's so weird. Like, this is a character I still don't fully have figured out yet. This episode, though, I think I've kind of picked and pruned some things more than I had any other time, but that's based on kind of stuff that's going to happen later. But you can kind of give us your initial thoughts there besides, Eva Relina that everybody kind of goes to initially, which is a fair place to start.
Yeah. Okay. So just going top down, I'm going to skip over basically everything but the last 5 minutes. We have a very straightforward Sally Poe brains the Gundam. The Gundam falls into the ocean. Noin saves. They go and retrieve the Gundam and have the start of a friendship or alliance occurring. We also have at the same time occurring both Katra and Hiro being able to relate to these particular Oz members while also realizing that they have no idea what to do. These are all interesting, but they're also very straightforward. So if you're watching along with us, listeners, there isn't a whole lot to really expound on there. It seems to me pretty straightforward. Can we agree on that, Skeyhill?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that it's just more a continuation of what the show's been doing a lot, where the show begins and like the Alliance is all bad. And then we find out that, well, it's not really all of the Alliance. And then it's like Oz is all bad. But now it's like, well, it's not really all of Oz. It's just people who are getting caught up in a structure. They all want the same thing, but are willing to try to achieve them in wildly different ways, despite being part of the same structure.
Well, I'm also going to note here that just while we use this as a sort of transition to these last 5 minutes, I appreciate that Noin has decided that she's effectively going to be a modern day ninja, not in the sake of having masks and throwing stars and anything, but being someone who is willing to do darker deeds without attaching Relina's name to them so that everything can move in a more fluid manner because Noin believes in Relina's actions. I also love that once again, we see the badass butler.
He's ready to pull out a gun and shoot somebody. He was ready to go.
Yeah, he was ready until he felt the dark presence of Dorothy here. In a place that is not supposed to have weapons, he straight up had a gun ready to shoot her in the damn head. I think that speaks volumes to who this man is and what he feels. This person, I can't wait to find out if he's like some sort of sleeper hit of a character that nobody really talks about at this point, but was like the biggest badass by the end of the series.
Yeah, sadly, Butler gets really no love. He's just really like a plot butler, though this is sort of a more interesting thing that he does, or like was ready to do, and it says a lot that he was willing to do it. And Noin's official title is like Captain of the Guard, quote unquote, but she's sort of like, this country's like secret police trying to do things under cuff and off the radar. Like what they're both really doing is trying to prepare for something terrible happening, which likelihood it will because they're enemies of Romefeller, which is rapidly unifying the world under its rule against the Sank Kingdom. The Dark Presence is a little too cartoonish to me. It's just sort of like Duke de Merle is sending somebody to your school, very likely, since he hates Relina, that this person might just be an assassin. So it's more of just like he's being competent and worthwhilely suspicious. So he's just ready to go. And it's not like there's this evil aura around Dorothy and he's just like, oh.
No. I mean, I used it as a way to depict the way it was effectively stated in the dub for me, where they don't talk about it as overtly as assassin. They talk about how she had this menacing air about herself.
Yeah, and that's this
So-
sort of this kind of blood. She just loves this war that she sort of announces at the end. She thinks that there's valiant things in this war. And I actually want to talk about, in the manga, her speech is a little more interesting. They're sort of debating, like, if someone attacks you, Relina, what are you going to do? You're going to defend yourself, right? Like, that's a beautiful thing. And Relina's like, no, I disavow all wars. And then she says, are you disavowing just wars? And Relina says, I simply want to disavow war entirely. And so then Dorothy goes on the speech where she says, Lady Relina, you can be certain all wars throughout history have hoisted the banner of righteousness, culture, race, religion, territory, principles, ideology. Those were righteous causes to be adhered to, no matter what was sacrificed. Therefore, war cannot be denied. That's what I was taught. And so righteous warriors fight, believing in peace that will come to the world afterwards. And that's sort of that's sort of a seed of what you can kind of try to piece together as we see other weird sides of Dorothy for the rest of the series.
So I do want to pedal back a bit, though, before you had to go on your bit with Dorothy, that I think it's interesting that you used the term secret police.
Yeah.
Something that is generally applied to totalitarian governments. And I make note of it because it's not far-fetched when considering the way they talk about the Sank Kingdom as we start following Relina. They start talking about how in order to be free, you cannot have pure freedom. There has to be restrictions, guidelines, and laws, which, while removed from this, makes sense. In context of it, does sound like somebody's preparing to set up a totalitarian government. So it'll be interesting to see where Relina goes with this idea of peace. Is it peace by force?
Yeah, and so this is sort of the very interesting thing. Why I think Relina is our main character, despite losing her for 10 episodes or so, because. And that's why they have to now give us Dorothy, because she needs sort of this constant antagonist as she's going to vie to protect her ideals and what she believes in, and have to kind of grow and change those as the second half of the series unfolds based on the events of the world around her. Like that sparring between them is going to continue on a lot of different levels in a lot of different medium in the world of this show. So that's, I guess, why I wanted to read you this little manga passage to give you a little more firm foundation for Dorothy as you're like, well, what are these two arguing about here? Yeah. It might not necessarily be what they're saying. Also, a fun little backstory on the butler. In the manga, there is a scene as the Sank Kingdom is being attacked by the Alliance and destroyed. The old king is like holding his dead wife, and he points to the butler who has like little baby Relina in his hands. He's like, you got to get out of here. And then like somebody's running by him and like he stops him and he says, you got to go and make sure this butler makes it out okay with my daughter. And the man salutes and says, of course, upon my very life, I'll make sure that she is protected. And that man ends up being Relina's adoptive father that got killed many, many episodes ago.
I do think that there's something to be said, though, based on what you were just talking about with regard to Relina and Dorothy, in that they're in a different kind of war or conflict. When people hear the word war, myself included, you tend to think of guns, machinery, ballistics, loss of life. There's also political theater and war, whether that be verbal war, mental war, or otherwise, that are often overshadowed because there are not direct casualties. It is not instantaneous loss of life. But that does not mean there is not loss of life by way of how people come to certain agreements, laws. I wonder whether or not that's going to be an aspect that is touched on here, or if we're going to continue using the term war solely to talk about boots on the ground.
Yeah, so that's why this show has that a lot of Gundam shows don't, is this emphasis through Relina on this other axis of conflict, which is this political theater that gets to happen. And so that's going to be sort of Relina's concurrent role while the Gundams are doing their Gundam-y things that we come to know and love. Relina's going to fight now on this other stage to try to bring about these similar ideals.
And I do look forward to seeing how that gets played out on screen, because it is very easy to just say, okay, we say that this thing happens and now there is a slight change to the rules on the battlefield. That is something that one could expect from a show that is, maybe lightly touching on that part. But if we're actually going to see the mental conflict between individuals, the philosophical conflict between individuals being played out, I'm here for that.
Yeah, it's more of a debate on sort of like ideology, like how should we run our world, and what is the best place of governance to ensure that conflicts are reduced entirely. And like that, that is sort of where Relina is doing now, what Treize was trying to do secretly, what Duke Dermail is doing, and what Dorothy's going to kind of needle herself into as we go forward. Like that's what we get to do with those people, since none of them are going to really go into mobile suits and fight.
To me, though, I just feel like it's important to consider whether or not Relina is wholly in the right yet or not, because at this point, her argument is she wants no war at all. That is not a minimizing, that is a complete absolving of, a removal of this mentality. And I wonder whether or not she is going to actually have to be challenged on that front in a meaningful way by Dorothy or not.
Yeah, and that challenge might come from other places too, right? She's essentially espousing the same philosophy of her father did that got her kingdom destroyed and her parents killed, and hopes that this time it might work better. Meanwhile, you have the butler and Noin, setting up for a conflict. So, like, her challenges to her ideals might even come from within her own kingdom, let alone whatever Dorothy's going to try to do.
Well, in my head, I'm thinking that Dorothy is going to assassinate not necessarily the person, but the ideal of the person, trying to show her that this belief that she has is not even founded by the people that follow her, because they're also going to acknowledge that war is a reality, which completely contradicts that. And when she thinks everything is going her way, to find out that it's been happening without her knowledge, she might lose her shit. And this is purely just spitball speculation. I look forward to seeing how any of this may play out.
Yeah, spitball away, right? That's the beauty of kind of week-to-week viewing as opposed to binge viewing, is you have this time to kind of meditate, marinate, sit on these things, let them simmer. But ultimately, I will say, Bob, is Dorothy is really weird. So, like pay attention, because she's just so weird.
I appreciate you trying to give me the warning. Listeners, I'm a person who loves an anime called Kakegurui. Skeyhill here, I don't believe, knows what I'm talking about. So in summation, rich kids who are at a private school where gambling is the primary mode of entertainment, and it's the social structure. And you follow a woman who seems to gain erotic pleasure from the thrill of taking chances, the thrill of potentially losing something. And there are other people who are obsessed in other really absurd, some borderlining on sexual, others borderlining on masochistic levels of enjoyment for gambling. I am prepared for some weird shit.
Yeah, I guess I don't. Just pay attention. Just like, because it's very easy
I'll pay attention.
To be dismissive, but she's very weird. So just keep watching. Yeah, so there you go. Those are my thoughts on Gundam Wing. Very excited for where things go.
Okay, well, speaking of where things go, do we want to go the way we go?
Like sand through the hourglass, this is the way that we go.
Let us go the way we go. Bob, where did you go this week?
This week, I definitely felt like watching these kids have to manage themselves underneath what appears to be more like a strict principle than a war veteran who has taken them semi-captive. I was watching their escape, and the thought that came to mind was when. Do you remember Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory?
I don't remember which one that is.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the Gene Wilder film from back in the 70s.
I do remember that one. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when they are in the TV room where they shrink the chocolate, and Mike TV goes in front of the thing that's supposed to shrink stuff, Willy Wonka is just over there like, no, wait, stop, come back.
Yeah.
Completely without heart. And in the back of my head, that's the only thing I could think of this particular individual doing as he left the two dogs that these kids were playing with to guard their tent. Like, even the dogs are like, no, you can go, bark, bark.
Yeah, that actually is, we didn't get to talk about this very much, but that's an interesting duo, getting to see Hiro and Catra together, because it feels like they're just so very different. But at the same time, Hiro who seems to be sort of only focused on like his mission and getting this job done and only really knows how to be in battles, as he sort of says in the letter to that guy, acknowledges to Hiro that he's like, kindness probably will not help you in this war, but afterwards, that's what they're going to need the most. So he sort of acknowledges the world that will exist after this fight, even if he himself doesn't feel like he's a part of it. And so getting to see these two people kind of on these polar ends are interesting. Are going to be an interesting juxtaposition, and how they might rub off on each other is interesting. And then thus having also Relina kind of come in back into the show at this time sort of says where we might go with Hiro after this. All right, we're actually running a bit long here, so we'll skip my way we go this week and just go straight to the Nerd Corner.
Let's take a walk to the Nerd Corner, where we will talk about a lot of nerd stuff. Yeah.
All right, Bob, my Nerd Corner this week is a bit of an update. I have talked many times about this Arbelos release of Satan Tango. They had it in the theaters a little over a year ago, right before everything shut down. Now, finally, the Blu-ray has arrived. Turns out I did make the cutoff for this limited edition. Very stoked about that. Comes with a little postcard, a bookmark made out of like film strip from the movie. Very fun. And this great slipcover. So, and I was always wondering, like, how many Blu-ray discs do you need for a 7.5 hour 4K restoration of this film? Turns out just 2. So less than I thought maybe 3, because it's sort of like a 3. When you show this movie, you generally have 2 intermissions. So I wondered if they were going to do it like that. And then loads of special features, great essays, commentary, look backs, things like that, retrospectives. So if you want to pick it up, regular versions of this Blu-ray are still available. No more limited editions left. All 500, or there are 1,000 now, sold. But definitely support them. They seem to be an even more niche Criterion collection. This is their 4th release. Hopefully there will be many more. Bob, what do you have in the Nerd Corner this week?
Yeah, well, so for my Nerd Corner, I'm actually excited to note that this might be an update. I talked about a documentary that should be coming out sometime in the near future about the genre that I'm, very adept at compared to some others, tokusatsu, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm about to film my interview for that. I want to say tomorrow once I get my second ring light. But yeah, we have a documentary coming out from the Next Decade Productions, owned and operated by Dustin Beadle. That's Beedle. Check him out on Patreon, YouTube, the like. But he has this documentary coming out called Tamashi. And Tamashi, coming from the word soul, is going to be a story of tokusatsu, how it came about, why it's so popular, especially to those in the West, and also a sort of call to the producers and makers out in Japan to understand why Westerners want to support them directly instead of having to be pirates, effectively. We can't watch these series legally in the United States, generally speaking, because there's not a lot that is being brought over. And so I'm going to be giving answers to some of that. You'll see me in that documentary, which will, I believe, drop around Valentine's Day. And there will eventually be physical special edition copies that will go out. So by the time you listen to this, it will probably be around that time. Please go ahead and find Tamashi, Dustin Beetle, The Next Decade Productions. You can find them on Patreon. You can find them on Ko-fi. You can find them on Twitter. You can find them on YouTube.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. What is coffee?
Oh, well, besides the delicious beverage that I love, KO-FI, Ko-fi, is a website very similar to Patreon in that rather than having to be a subscription service, you can instead show your appreciation for someone by purchasing for them a coffee. So you're generally giving someone between $3 and $5 as a small token of appreciation for what they're doing in their given art or industry. You can give them updates and show them a goal that you are aiming towards. So I myself have a coffee. If you looked up ko-fi.com/BobScaryVOA, you could see that I'm trying to build cash towards upgrading my personal equipment and gaining lessons for certain things like accents and what have you. Every time you donate a coffee to somebody, every time you buy them a coffee, it goes towards that goal. And so you're effectively helping to fund the future artists of tomorrow in that way. And if they have physical merchandise, if they're a physical artist, you can purchase through there and help them just the same.
All right, well, there you go. That sounds like a nice romantic pickup for the Valentine holiday. Hopefully, Bob will keep us updated on that. Bob, do you have any other plugs as we wrap things up here?
Certainly. Hey, hi, Worldwide Sentai. This is Bob Scary VOA coming at you live from Zaku Talk headquarters. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and a slew of other places by looking at my handle, Bob Scary VOA. You can also go to bobscaryvoa.com to listen to my demos. And if you so desire, you could maybe watch me in a few of the special films that Skeyhill had done in his more freshman years. I would say if you want to be like a bunch of Germans, you could go on to Amazon Prime and watch Real Love.
Weirdly popular in Germany still. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Don't know why our romantic comedy is translating so well to them. Yes, Real Love, my first feature film. Hopefully have another one out in the next few years. All right, and of course we'd like to thank Lev Van Rensselaer for minding the audio boards. And I am your host, Patrick Scale. You can find my features, documentaries, short films, video essays, animations, behind-the-scenes footage, and so much more at QuixoticUnited.com and social media, presumably with a similar-sounding name. Thank you all for listening. Bob, tell the audience how many lemons are in your house.
I haven't spoken to Aaron in a while, so right now 0 lemons are in the house.
That is a niche reference.
Just one